All right, what's up, you guys? UFO Proof here, and I have a special show for you today. We are doing an interview with our friend Lance. How do we pronounce your last name? Mungia.
Mungia. It's like
Mungia.
Carmen Gia. Remember those old cars, like Carmen Gia, but without the car.
Mungia.
Mungia.
Mungia. Mungia. All right.
Like you're eating
Lance
spaghetti.
is the director of Third Eye Spies, the documentary I've been going off about for the past week. Um, Lance, why don't you tell everybody how you got started in this idea for Third Eye Spies, and what's the basis of this video about this
Well,
movie?
okay, so first we have to ask, what is remote viewing? Remote viewing is the act of using only your mind to see things that are otherwise hidden anywhere in space and time, and any place in space and time. And this was something that was discovered in modern science. It's been around for thousands of years through more esoteric circles, but science basically discovered this in the 1970s at a place called Stanford Research Institute. And that is basically how I found out about it. I was a kid. I was, reading. My grandmother had this old Reader's Digest that she had, and it was all about the U.S. Army using psychics to spy on the Soviet Union. And I was just a kid, but I thought that was like the coolest thing ever, was like psychic spies. So I kept that Reader's Digest for years. I mean, I was writing like little scripts and stuff, and I thought that maybe someday it would be something that I would do. And many, many years after that, I stumbled across a man by the name of Russell Targ, who had seen another movie of mine by the name of Six String Samurai, which you can get on Amazon, or you can get Amazon Prime, or even on YouTube has it. And he'd seen the movie, and he was looking for someone to direct a narrative feature film, not based on his work through Stanford Research Institute studying what became known as remote viewing, but actually on something completely different. And I had read his script, and we talked on the phone about it, and I said, I think that the real story here is the story of your life. I mean, the fact that he had done classified work for the U.S. government legitimately for over 20 years, this program ran, and every U.S. intelligence agency used psychics, for lack of a better word, to spy on their enemies, and they did some amazing, astounding things. And so that kind of initial conversation with Russell led to him and I meeting. We spent a weekend at my house, basically going over a bunch of documents and data that he had collected. And in the back of my mind, I was just kind of going, is this even for real? Is this stuff really real? And then he finally gets to the part about, Freedom of Information Act, and, congressional delegations being briefed, and presidential cabinets, and the fact there were hearings on this, and the fact that they had been supported at the highest levels of government. And so that combined with the fact that, I felt like we needed a whole bunch of different firsthand witnesses to really make this make sense for people, and to sort of show the reality of this. That was really my caveat for doing the film, was to bring all of these people together. And we were able to do that for the first time. And now the movie is available worldwide, throughout every digital platform you can think of: Xbox, Google Play, iTunes, Amazon, Vimeo. You can download this no matter where you're watching this from. And actually, within 1 week, we are now in the top 5 documentaries on iTunes. Even after the Oscars, we're beating like Oscar winners with this film right now.
Well, we're going to have to make it #1 because it is incredible. And one thing I'd like to point out for people who haven't seen it, and if you haven't, go see it. I'm telling you, it's totally worth it. Is unlike every other fringe documentary, this is the only one that has credibility to it, where Lance makes it a point to build up the believability of remote viewing and the possibilities of it, to the point where you completely accept that this can be done. And then at the very end, he brings it back down to where, no, don't start thinking you can just go and do this. This is just, and he brings it back down to a level of reality. And this is what's so impressive about the film. It's very enjoyable to watch. Then did you make it a point to try to say, okay, listen, this, I want to be able to get believers and skeptics at the same time, and not favor one or the other, but let them both know that, look, this is where we're going to try to go with this. And what was your mindset when you would come up with the process of how you put this film together?
I'm sorry. I was just using my mind to make you say all those really nice things about the movie.
Fucking asshole. For real, what were you thinking? Like you're like, I want to go for, I want to, make everyone believe it, and then just crush their dreams at the very end.
The thing is that the evidence at SRI points to the fact that intuitive abilities are a common human thing that we all have. We tend to look at it as something crazy or something, fringy or conspiracy or, magical thinking or whatever. But yet there's a lot of evidence that says that the reason that you and I are here having this conversation right now is because our ancestors both went left instead of right at the tree, and they didn't get eaten by the lion because they had a gut feeling about it. It's something that is inherent to who we are as human beings. And so that doesn't mean that everybody is going to be able to use mind control or something, or there's some, death rays are going to shoot out of somebody's eyes, or there's some really weird thing that's going to happen. It's a common thing. It not always is a massive
go off the edge. Why didn't you say, hey, let's go all the way. Let's sell 100 million videos to every nut job out there who loves this, that as well as I do. If we're talking business sense, if we're talking making the money, you could target these people, but you decided not to do that. You went in a way which I think is absolutely the best way you could have gone to make such a great movie. You weren't just trying to sell the tickets; you were trying to sell the movie itself, as in, look, this is legitimate. This needs to be researched. I mean, where were you on that?
Well, there's a lot of true believers on both sides of the fence about this kind of stuff. There's a lot of people who know that everything, the most outlandish stuff is real. And there's other people who say none of it's real, and it's like black and white. And we see it happening in our culture, in our society, to the point where it's actually fracturing society. I mean, we see it you're either right or you're left, or you're this or you're that, or, it's like you're either for this or against that. Science is not a football game, and I did not come into the project Third Eye Spies, available now worldwide that you can get anywhere. Thank you, Jim Martin in the Orchard. I didn't come into this with an agenda. I didn't come into this thinking, okay, I'm already a true believer in something, and I'm going to bring that to the table and then make a documentary of it. I was already a documentary and a narrative filmmaker for many years. I mean, I've had music videos, I've done some TV, I've done feature films. My first feature, like I said, Six String Samurai. The Crow. I did one of the Crow sequels, which wasn't my favorite film that I did, but part of that legacy.
I got to interrupt for a second. I know, he was all disappointed. We were talking earlier. You guys might not know this, but we had a failed interview earlier.
Take two.
Well, I found out that Lance was a director of one of the Crow movies. I was like, no fucking way. I have a giant tattoo of the Crow on my back. It's one of my favorite movies. That's crazy. Of course, I had seen the movie. He obviously, had his issues with it. I thought the movie was good. I don't know what.
Well, it's not so much the movie itself. There were wonderful people that worked on that film. I mean, there really were. And we had some awesome people involved with the film. It was just that, as a personal experience to me, the idea of making a big budget franchise film is incredibly stressful and incredibly time consuming. It took 4 years just to get that film done, practically. It's like it took a long time for that film to see fruition. And when you do something,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you tell everybody? I already know, but can you tell everyone how long it took to make this movie? How long have you been working?
Well, I started doing research on this, and Russell and I first met in 2014. And at the time, I had a day job that I was doing, and So I only did this in my spare time. I only did this, and basically this was a labor of love. My point to the other movie was it's a paid thing that you do when you work in Hollywood. But from the time frame of that to today, the industry has totally changed. Like we wouldn't be having this conversation on YouTube back then. It's the technology's changed. I have a camera sitting, back there that like is freaking badass that could shoot a film, and there is no film. It's like,
is it a red?
No, that's actually, it's a Canon. It's a C200. But it's the industry is fundamentally different. And so what that does is it opens up, like, for people like you and me to really talk about the things that truly interest us and that we think other people will be interested in without having to go to like a committee of other people and then, get them to approve it. Third Eye Spies, which now is available, like I said, anywhere. You can get anything on digital format. It didn't used to be that way. It used to be you'd have to go through that filtration system of a studio, and you.
Are you saying that Jim wasn't a fucking asshole coming down on you, like change this, change that? Like he was like, go ahead, do what you want, and make this your movie, and fucking I got you back, and blah blah blah.
No. I mean, we never had any. Nobody involved in the making of this was an asshole. It was, and it's never that someone's necessarily an asshole in the making of a film. It's just that there's so much pressure, and time constraints and money constraints when you make a big budget film. I probably test screened Third Eye Spies, I don't know, 2 dozen times maybe over a period of about 4 years. I would show it to friends. We would go to scientific conferences and show it. I would have screenings randomly, because I wanted to make sure that we got the story right, and to tell something as incredible and as impossible as a story about psychic spies using remote viewing to spy on America's enemies. To do that, you have to make sure that you can track it with people. Like you're saying, it has to be easy enough to understand and entertaining enough without like putting everybody to sleep. And that was a tremendous amount of effort. And now I can pick up a camera. I just today released a mini documentary on my YouTube page about gamblers using ESP in Vegas. There's a physicist that used to work for SRI that does these gambling experiments. They get like 80% accuracy or 75, something like that in Vegas, which is impossible odds. You're supposed to get like 25%. And I spent a week following them with just a consumer, DSLR at the time, and tracking them. And that's how the vast majority of everything in the film was done. And you couldn't have done that 10 years ago. So this story, despite the fact that it was classified back then, you also just could not have made a film like Third Eye Spies today, back then, and get that out to a mass audience. Now, literally, a distributor just presses a button and it's available everywhere. And then it becomes truly like a democratic process as to what people are going to watch, because we're not just talking about a studio that spends $10 million to promote a film. This film was done incredibly grassroots, like there was no, massive campaign behind it. So, I mean, Jim Martin and everybody, that was associated with it did an amazing job, but it's not in the traditional sense. It now is really up to the court of public opinion to make up their mind about a project as to whether they're going to watch it. And yes, we could have done the most outlandish thing possible, but that wouldn't have been worth me spending so much time. I mean, so much time. I mean, you have no idea. And in fact, I can't even tell you, how much time goes into a project like this. And at least in terms of us getting this particular project out. And it was never a matter of what to put in or we need more material. It was always a matter of how do we take enough stuff out, and still make this thing, feasible, because there was so many incredible stories in the film. And we literally had to, just keep testing it, keep trying things. And I was really very fortunate to have Russell Targ, who was one of the founders of the remote viewing program originally at Stanford, as the producer of the film, because, that opened up a lot of doors for us to at least initially approach some of the individuals in the film, many of which had never really gone on camera in a big way to talk about this stuff. It had been very underground. and now they can actually talk about it because it's been declassified. So that's why we made the film.
So your editing process was absolutely fantastic, and obviously it doesn't seem like there was this huge budget to the movie, and it absolutely seems like there was. Your style of editing and your locations and everything are really far beyond any other documentary director I have ever seen. And it's super impressive. And the movie is actually a quite a long movie. And as people know today, we have attention spans of fucking goldfish, and no one wants to. People are watching TikTok videos and 10-second videos, and this is a long documentary, and yet you stay enthralled the entire time watching it. Though it's very well put together. I mean, how much of the editing process was you, or did you have an editor for the film, or was this mostly you putting it all together, getting down?
We at one point hired a vendor to help. I thought that it was going to help with the editing, but it was it didn't work because we're talking about hundreds of hours of footage that I was shooting on my own time over a period of years. And you really, to get anyone else but me to actually sit through hundreds of hours of material and then actually digest that, know that, and actually be able to make something out of it, I found quickly that it just wouldn't happen. I mean, that's why the film took so long, because I was literally, on the one hand supporting a family, and on the other hand, trying to make the documentary. And that really came down to actually me teaching myself how to do stuff I didn't know, and just continuing to edit over a long period of time, and make it work, which was very frustrating to Russell, because Russell's getting up there in age, and he's like, TikTok, man, TikTok. I'm like, I don't got a lot of time. Like,
hurry up with this, man. Like, we gotta get this done, like,
right
now.
Right. And honestly, had I not really been passionate about the film and the subject matter, it almost would have been impossible to see it through, because it's something that you had to keep coming back to and revisiting and doing more research and reaching out to other people. And there's many people that we interviewed that aren't even in the film, frankly, because we had to at some point narrow it down and just tell the key stories. And the thing that I looked at again and again as a filmmaker was, where were the most compelling stories to fit into the film? Because I could literally like swap out every story in the film and put in a completely different set of stories and have a completely different film with the same people, because there's so much information that has now been declassified about the really cool work that was done within government circles using remote viewing. So I had to decide really what was I going to put in and what was I going to leave out. And that's where I really started to look for just the most amazing, most well-documented, stories that we could tell, in this.
Yes, I'm sorry. I want to get back to the film. I'm sorry. We had already had questions on, so I'm asking them like new stuff. I'm sorry. I want to try to get back.
It's fine.
Yeah, I know like Lance will be, he's on the clock, so I want to make sure we get the good questions in about the film. One of the main stars that you're discussing in the film is a character, a man by the name of Pat Price. He worked for the CIA remote viewing. Can you give us his background and lay out his story for us?
Yeah. Pat Price was almost like a savant, in a way, in the way that he was able to use remote viewing. He was a police commissioner, a lifetime cop from Burbank, California. And he was the guy who you would go to when you had a difficult case and there was no other way to solve it. He could basically look at that and give you some clue that would help you solve the case. Detectives were known for like going into his office and bringing a map and saying, okay, we got a stolen car in Burbank. Pat, where do you think it is? And then he would look at the map and go, I'm seeing a guy over here near the mall that's like, really seems scared and his heart's beating. And, I think you might find the car there. And then they go look and they find the car there.
So he was remote viewing without knowing what remote viewing was.
That's right.
It was naturally happening to him, doing a job that puts him in a position where remote viewing, would come into play,
Yeah.
where he's hearing cases, and putting his mind there and realizing that he seems to be right a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And it's super important for our audience here to understand the term remote viewing and the work that was done at SRI. They didn't actually they invented the term, but they didn't invent intuitive abilities. I mean, this was something that has been talked about since the beginnings of time. I mean, the Greeks had their oracles. The Yoga Sutras talk about how 2,000 years ago, in the time of Christ, like if you were on your path of enlightenment, you may see things at a distance, things that are hidden outside of space and time. Don't pay too much attention to it. It's not a big deal. It's just, I'm sorry?
Hence the third eye.
That's right. That's right. That's where that comes from the Hindus. And it's part of us as who we are as human beings. Pat Price was doing it, and he didn't know how to maybe label it, but he was just known as somebody like that. So Pat, once Stanford Research Institute, where Russell Targ and his partner Hal were working, once they'd had some success publicly, like they'd had a paper published in Nature, and this was nothing to do with the classified work they were doing. It was just their basic ESP experiments. Pat reached out to them and said, "Hey, I'd like to be a subject. I think I'm pretty good at this kind of stuff, and I'd like to be studied." And SRI was already working with a psychic by the name of Ingo Swann, who really claimed to be one of the greatest psychics in the world. And Ingo had been given a task to look at some coordinates that were provided sort of under the table by CIA. And they weren't working with CIA at this time, but they were provided the coordinates by CIA because CIA was very concerned about the use of psychic abilities in intelligence gathering, because they understood that the Soviet Union had probably 70 different laboratories all over the Soviet Union studying this stuff, and according to their intelligence reports, actually using it in operations. So this was a big deal for CIA, and they had just gotten this sort of like very subtle approach by the CIA to hey, if there's some coordinates over here, can you look at them and tell us what's going on there? And Pat happened to come into the program about that time. So they gave the coordinates to Pat and to Ingo. Both of them looked at the coordinates and they found very similar things. They were both independently tested on this, and they both came back with, a military base, missile silos, underground facility, flagpole here, names of people, names of operations going on. This is Pat actually came back with that. And, the scientists look at it. They have no idea what it is. They're just like, this is interesting, but, they both got the same thing. So they mail it off to the guy from CIA. And the guy from CIA looks at this and goes, "Oh, man, this is bogus. This is bullshit. I gave them the coordinates to my buddy's cabin out in the woods, not to some like top secret base, But when the CIA guy found out, and he's in our movie, by the way, he tells the story. When he found out that there was both psychics got the same thing, then he says, let's take a family trip up to the woods this weekend, and let's check out my buddy's cabin and see what's up there. So he drives up there, and as he's driving, he notices out in the distance these giant radar dishes, not too far away. And it sounds like something that Pat Price described and that Ingo, in fact, drew. And he goes, "Gee, I wonder what that is." So he investigates, and turns out it's a super highly classified NSA listening post to spy on Soviet satellites. In fact, it's so sensitive that within 100-mile radius of this whole place, you can't even use radio signals and stuff like walkie-talkies and stuff like that, because they didn't want anything to interfere with their instrumentation. It's like a no radio zone, radio silent. And so he sends this documentation off to NSA, says, "Is there anything to this?" Next day, NSA, FBI, his bosses at CIA, all these people showing up at his office like, "Why are you guys punking the NSA? Don't be doing that. Like, why are you out there, spying? Like you shouldn't be doing this." And he was freaked out. And he just pointed to the guys in California. And he said, "Go talk to these guys at SRI. They did it." and that brought
He
SRI.
dropped dime on him. He gave him up. He gave
right.
up his own men. He's like, you take him. He snitched his own men out. Jesus.
That's right. That's right. And basically, that brought the Stanford Research Institute under the banner of CIA for that project, and they funded it, and from there it expanded out to many different agencies. But the thing that freaked them all out the most, I spent a week with Ken Kress, who was the undercover physicist that ran it for CIA at its inception, and Ken said that literally every intelligence agency was freaked out by what Pat Price did, not just because he identified the site, but because he actually wrote down the names of special access projects that by definition were above top secret and that nobody was supposed to know. He got those names correctly. And so they really wanted to know, how the hell did they do that? Are they faking it or not? And this led to a lot of, just chaos within the intelligence community, and ultimately them doing a lot of work.
They went to Stanford and they were like, fuck you, Pat's coming with us. Shut up, deal with it, and that's it. And then they had to just shut up and take it. And they're like, you just, do your calculations and get us some fucking psychics, all right?
Yeah.
That's what they did, huh?
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. They basically, CIA did not trust Stanford Research Institute because because they thought they were being conned. Honestly, they didn't believe it at first. They were like, there must be some leak. There must be something wrong with the situation. And so ultimately, they took Pat. They made him an actual official agent of CIA, and they sequestered him on a farm in of all places, Virginia. And from there, they constantly monitored him, and they constantly gave him tasks that were higher and higher and higher in sort of difficulty, in terms of nobody in U.S. intelligence would be able to fake it. And time and again, he proved that he could do it. And shortly after that, he passed away, and he died.
One of the main points, or maybe a side note in your film about Pat Price, is that he died, and the film goes on to start to indicate and show some evidence on why he could have been taken out, how he could have been rubbed out by a number of different agencies, maybe CIA, maybe KGB, who knows? And there was a lot of evidence building up to this, and you were starting to feel like this is really like where it could go. And then you crush everyone's hopes again. And you bring in Russell Targ is having a discussion with Uri Geller, spoiler alert again, and he's bringing this up to him. And Uri Geller makes it a point to say, the CIA is not in the job of killing people. Yeah. And brings you right back down to reality. They're not in the job of killing. They're not a bunch of dudes sitting around, like, oh, let's go assassinate this. They're dudes like us. They're not sitting around like that, okay? They're not sitting around plotting people's murders. And he's like, that they're not doing it. And it just brings you right back down to reality, which you do a number of times in the film, which I think absolutely helps. So, and that's kind of that's kind of like the whole point of the film is to to build it up and then bring it back to a reality of the situation. And please go ahead.
Well, number one, there's definitely different opinions about how Pat Price died. First off, anybody, and it's known that the Russians were definitely tracking everything that SRI was doing. That was a well-known fact. And they were very keenly interested in particularly Pat Price. And
why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you be want that guy?
And so was CIA. They were very concerned about Pat Price, and they never completely trusted Price for reasons that you would have to watch the film to find out all the details. But if you knew of somebody that could literally read the nuclear codes, if you knew that, like, whatever your dirtiest secret might possibly be, that this guy might have access to them. And if you didn't fully trust him, or if from the Soviet side, if you knew that this guy was an incredibly accurate asset, I don't know. But
Well,
on the other hand, the guy had a heart condition, and you know, he was not that old. He was only 57. But I mean, Luke Perry just died the other day. What was he, like 54 or something? So I mean, it happens.
what?
Yeah, you know that?
He just died?
Yeah, he died. Isn't that terrible?
Holy
Yeah.
fuck.
Yeah, I know. Beverly Hills 90210, man. I mean, that sucks. I love that show. I love that guy. He's a great guy, you know. But anyway, so there were differing stories about what happened, but a lot of people thought the KGB did him in. You know, there were a lot of weird things around when he died. I mean, he sort of predicted his own death, and he bought a life insurance policy a few days earlier for his wife. You know, you know, so we'll never know, maybe for a fact, but I will say that there was a lot of interest in him, and at that same time, that CIA was also at least sort of tangentially training their own people to do remote viewing. You know, so
I would like to speculate the possibility of remote strangulation happening to Price. Now, I'm not the one I didn't just make this shit up. You guys think, oh, UFO proof making up a funny term of remote strangulation. No, okay? I heard it in the movie. I'm telling you, I got a feeling they strangled his heart from across the fucking ocean and took his ass out, dude. KGB don't fuck around, man. That's how you should have done it, dude.
Sorry, man. I'm sorry. I was just trying something. It wasn't working. I don't know.
Because I'm spoiling the movie. I'm sorry.
No. It's fine. I mean, there was a KGB asset. She was in charge of watching SRI from Moscow and tracking the activities of the remote viewing program. Her name was Larissa Valenskaya, and Dale Graff, who headed the DIA project in this regard, Stargate, you know, he told me a story about how Larissa Valenskaya actually defected from the Kremlin and showed up at the front door of Stanford Research Institute and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I know all about you guys, and I'd love to be a part of your work." You know, and she told a story that freaked her out, and this is in the doc. I mean, it's just archival footage because she passed away years ago, but she told the story that she was part of an experiment where they had somebody in Moscow picture somebody else in Leningrad and pretend to strangle them remotely, and that the person they were studying in Leningrad then almost lost consciousness, and they had to stop the experiment. So now, before we start talking about like psychic killings and you know, going there, the mind is a funny thing, and it's not hard to, like, if I said, Kyle, man, I have the ability to strangle people with my mind, dude, and about 9 o'clock tonight, I'm gonna start thinking about fucking killing you, man. You know, if I did that, then you would maybe like start like having like heart palpitations.
A placebo effect.
What's that?
Like a placebo effect.
Yeah, exactly. And not just a placebo effect, but I will say that in general, the intelligence that was coming back to the States was that it's much, much harder to affect things in the world, to do PK, to affect someone's physiology. It's almost impossible to show that and prove that in a way that is actually real. But it's very, very possible to prove something like ESP, or the fact that you can use your mind to see other things. So the U.S. efforts were most definitely geared towards inbound information. Like they were trying to gather information from other sources psychically, while the Soviets spent a lot of money with outbound information, like trying to affect someone's mind, trying to, stop the heart of a goat, like whatever, you name it. You know, they probably tried to do it, but it's everything that they pointed to said that it really didn't go anywhere. So, you know, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt.
We were discussing the connection between quantum mechanics and remote viewing earlier. And with Russell Targ being a physicist, with Hal Puthoff being a physicist, and you ground this movie in a lot of science and like we were saying, in quantum mechanics, you can't ever know exactly where something is or how fast it's going. It's fundamental properties of quantum mechanics, and that you can't actually, there's certain things like when it comes to remote viewing, you're never going to be able to know 100% the answer. So trying to prove it that way could be a very difficult task. It might be able to perform it easier than being able to understand it. Mm-hmm. And I think the movie does a really good job at putting that all into perspective for you, especially for people like me and for everyone who doesn't know. I was not a fan of remote viewing. I was like, there's not enough evidence to support its viability until I saw this movie, this documentary, and the evidence behind it and the science behind it, it impressed me so much. And the way that it's broken back down for believers and skeptics alike to both question it and its abilities. Have you ever tried to remote view anything when you started researching it? Were you thinking, okay, let me try it and see if it works? And if have you ever got the idea that this seems legitimate, or were you like, I'm way off, let's just make the movie?
Well, I started under the premise that Russell Targ and the other scientists at SRI started from, which was, you sort of you don't get high on your own supply. You don't like start becoming a participant if you're trying to actually look at this objectively, because it can taint your results. And I was just looking at wherever the information was taking me. I wasn't looking to become a true believer or from the perspective of a true believer. So I didn't want to like get heavily involved in doing remote viewing while I was doing the film. I on a lark, when I very first got involved, I tried it once while I was reading one of Joe McMoneagle's books, who was one of the Army remote viewers in the movie. And I tried it like briefly, and I got some like really super quick impressions, and I was on my way to dinner, and I was saying like, what's the first thing I'm going to see when I open the door? And I got an impression of something that looked like this rapidly blooming rose in my mind with like these little sparkles on it. And when I opened up the door to the dinner place, there was this giant red bow like right in front of me with all this glitter on it, so that was the only time I actually did it myself. But the real thing here is that from Russell's work, from these other people's work, they were saying it was a common ability. Well, at a certain point, I needed to get some real remote viewing into the film. I didn't want to just have it be a bunch of like older people telling stories about remote viewing as if it was something that happened a long time ago. I wanted to see who's doing this today. And we went to the International Remote Viewing Association conference, which is a real thing. They have a conference every year. And I documented probably 150 or 200 people doing a remote viewing that Russell Targ walked them through on stage. And all we knew was that there was a person who was wearing a GoPro who was going to go out somewhere in Vegas and hang out for like an hour and then come back. And nobody knew where that person was going to be. And I documented all these people. I was very nervous about it, actually, because I was like, wow, like if the results are like totally no good, if nobody gets this, I'm going to have to like put that in the documentary. And because I'm just documenting it, I'm not going to completely ignore it. And so, it obviously made the documentary more complex. But as I'm watching all of these people drawing, and I'm like going down the line and I'm looking at these people's drawings and what they're doing, I started to notice right away that there were themes amongst what they were doing. Like people were drawing triangles on pieces of paper. A lot of people were drawing fish. I saw a couple of like coin fountains, like with water kind of flowing, all this kind of stuff. And I'd already noticed like, wow, there's a lot of people that are drawing water-based things. And the guy came back from hiding, and the place he'd been hiding at was in a fishing shop with a giant waterfall with fish everywhere and these triangular glass windows to the outside that were shaped in triangles. And that was all on video. And so, Irva said that like 80% of the audience in the drawings got the correct result. And that really blew me away. I mean, I didn't use like a tenth of the drawings that we actually had in the film because everybody kept saying you're doing too much. It's like, it's just long. You're like, you're putting too many in there. But it stunned me. It stunned me that all of these like regular people, who many of which I knew had never done it before, were doing it. And that to me became something that drove me through the course of the making of the rest of the film, because it wasn't that I was a true believer. It was that just the solid evidence of what I was seeing was that there really was something there, and that so many people had spent the majority of their lives, very credible people with PhDs after their names, like, people who were considered very serious scientists, had spent their lives working on this, and the story had not been told. And so I thought that was a tragedy, and that's why I sort of kept it going.
Now, in the movie, there are some scenes where major events happen, geopolitically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a individual who pops up throughout the movie a couple of times to take part in these major events, and yet this person is completely unknown. It's some female that you had said had a hand in this and had a hand in that, but don't actually have her name or anything like that. Now I want to know, what's her fucking name, dude? You gotta know the name. Give me the name. What's her name, dude? Look her up.
Are you talking about the remote viewer that found the bombers? Are you talking about the bomber?
Yes.
Okay. I cannot disclose that information.
You better tell me, dude. Fuck that. I want to know. I want to know bad, dude.
There's a couple of different people. Here's what I found in the making of the film. Okay, and here's where it does get sort of really very conspiracy based. Is that I believe all of the more public remote viewers and scientists who worked on that project when they say that it's not going on, and when they say that they've retired from doing it for the government, I believe that. But there were a lot of other people that I tried to get interviews with that wouldn't give me interviews because they were the lesser known people who had worked on that project and who had done some of the most amazing things. Because what they found at SRI was that pretty much anybody that they brought into the lab that happened to be halfway successful, halfway social, well-grounded in reality, not already living on another planet, psychically, that they would get decent results, and that a few of them would get great results. And a few of those people who had done some of the most incredible things never came forward. In fact, I mean, I'll tell you, just between you and me, and everybody else, I had emails disappear from my email box. I've had emails
with the CIA. You had to send them questions and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
but I've had conversations where I later wanted to go back and look at those conversations with some of the people that aren't in the film, and those conversations are for sure not in my email box. And what the fuck happened to them? I don't know, but I'm telling you, like, if I had wanted to go, here's the person that I spoke with that I can't, because the information is not there. It's like, I don't have it anymore. So how do you explain that?
That's how they get you, dude.
Yeah. But amongst,
you think, or I just want to ask real quick, did you consider, like, the CIA had their program, okay? Now, what about Jim Chanigan and like the First Earth Battalion, who were doing remote viewing for the military, like Third Phase of Moon's documentary? That is, which is also very interesting, a very good documentary that shows, that they were doing it for the military. I mean, what's the difference how they were doing it and what they're doing at SRI?
Okay, so here's the thing about our film purposely chose one little slice of this that was digestible. And I think that's why it's doing so well right now on iTunes and in other places, is because you can kind of wrap your head around it at the end of the day, because it tells a contained story. But the thing about government, especially the intelligence agencies, that I really learned over the course of a lot of conversations about this stuff, is that we think of government as like one big thing that it just operates as one Machiavellian, dude with a mustache twirling in the background going, we're going to do this today and nobody's going to know about what we're doing, and it doesn't work that way. In government, the left hand never knows what the right hand is doing when it comes to intelligence. It's called stovepiping, and they'll have like one vertical command, that deals with, say, the UFO subject, like ATIP and the Pentagon program, who, by the way, Hal Puthoff, who did the remote viewing program with Russell, was also involved in sort of the aftermath of the ATIP program with Robert Bigelow and all of that, but he was working in the remote viewing program in just this one little sliver of the intelligence community, and no one else knew what was going on. So like, if you get out of that stovepipe to the rest of the world, it doesn't exist. So over here you had SRI and their program, and they did so much work for every agency of government in the intelligence communities, from Coast Guard to Secret Service to DIA, CIA, NSA, on down the line. Every single branch they were doing remote viewing for, and it worked. So once the technique was out, then you had guys like General Stubblebine in the Army, who was working very closely with SRI, but also decided that he was going to do stuff like PK, stop the heart of a goat, like all that, try all that stuff that the Soviets were doing to see if it was going to work. And it really didn't work for him, in that way. It didn't really work out. But what did was you had a very close relationship between the Army remote viewers and SRI, because Russell and Hal trained the original Army remote viewers how to do remote viewing. And then it kind of grew out from there. Now, First Earth Battalion was a completely different thing that had nothing to do with the people at SRI. They did not even know of its existence, as far as I know, that anybody's ever said. So it's a completely different story, that lives out there. It wasn't even really part of the main Fort Meade remote viewing unit. He was now Lynn Buchanan, who was in the third phase of the moon documentary, was part of the Fort Meade remote viewers. But a lot of the other things they were doing were different things. You had Colonel John Alexander and General Stubblebine and these guys out there that were just trying all of these sort of out of the box ideas, because remote viewing is kind of like a gateway drug. It's like you're looking at it and going, okay, if this is real, then what else are we missing? And so that's what they were doing. But I believe that probably there were programs going on in other agencies that we may never know about, because they weren't as official as the SRI program. Like the Stanford Research Center program and the main Army program were super well reported and documented. Like they had oversight in Congress, all the way to the presidential cabinet level, at times. So there's tons of documentation on that. And when the Army guys would get out of the Army, they'd start talking, and they all had non-disclosure agreements, and they all were not supposed to talk about this at all, but they would, because they weren't career, lifelong intelligence people. A lot of times, sometimes they were just grunts out of the Army that they trained and they were really good at doing it. And so they kept them doing it, and then they retired. That's not the case in CIA, and I think that CIA and even the higher ups in defense intelligence did not like the idea of the Army guys getting out and blabbing. So they really denigrated that aspect of the program. At the same time they were using it, they were saying that it didn't work, and that in fact, the Army was incompetent and all this other stuff. And I think that was really by intent, because they understood that that's where the leaks were coming from. And so it really is just a question of a many tentacled octopus here, and we don't know where all of those tentacles really go or how far they reach.
No, that makes perfect sense. And it seems that if so many different branches of military or intelligence were at least Army, CIA, and definitely in Russia, in the KGB, that is probably going on in a bunch of different places. And then now in the movie, they were saying the study went on for what, 10 years?
No, 20 years. 20 years was the SRI portion. They spent about $22 million over 20 years at SRI, which was a lab of about, a few dozen psychics and a few researchers. And you may say, well, that's not a lot of money, but no, but that's actually misinformation, because that $20 million only takes into account the direct things that were happening in the building at SRI, does not take into account at all what was going on in the Army or the Air Force or other places in DIA, which would have been hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over many years. It also doesn't take into account any of the other intelligence assets that were used to verify, what SRI was doing. Like it's easy for you or me right now. I'm going to say, okay, what is the top terrorist in Syria going to have for lunch today? And you and I write that down and go, I think he's going to have some hummus. He's going to, he's going to do this. Maybe he's going to get a burger, and he's going to be hanging out at Carl's Jr. and you can go get him there. Okay, great. You and I would never in a million years be able to verify that shit. We can't, know for a fact. It's speculation. It's like looking at I can look at the dark side of the moon. And people remote viewers have, they've come back with lots of stories and interesting things they find on whatever. But it's all speculative. It's like the insider dude who says, I know all the secrets and you don't. And it's really bad. And I'm not going to tell you about it because it's really bad, but I know what I'm doing here. It's fucking speculation. And
perfect thing to say on UFO proof. I don't know how many, if you ever seen a show on here before, but that's like the perfect thing to say on this channel because it's something we all say. Anytime someone comes up to you and says, I know the aliens' agenda.
Right.
So you can just be like, all right.
You don't know. You don't know. All we know is we don't know. And that's really the problem with both ufology and remote viewing is that we know that something is there. That's not in debate. It's for fucking sure real. I mean, it's like there's loads and loads and loads of firsthand accounts and evidence and actual things you can pick up and look at and touch. But
they say they'll say stuff like, well, the problem is you can't predict a UFO. It's like because you're like, well, we don't have any physical evidence. There's no physical evidence that Jupiter exists. There's not a piece of Jupiter anywhere. We know it exists from observations. All right. And then they'll say, oh, well, we can't predict when will be here for us to observe. So that's why they're not thinking. Well, when you can't predict when a tornado or where a tornado will appear, but people see them and know they exist.
Right.
But you don't have a piece of it, like it can come and go.
Right. So but that right there, you just hit on the major point of why there can be a lot of misinformation and why there can be so much dissension in the scientific community on both subjects, because there's not a mechanism in place where I can hit a button and get the exact result every time. I can't pick up my phone and call ET to come appear over my head every single time and have him explain to me how that works. I can't ask you to remote view the Pentagon and then get a perfect result every time. It's not 100% accurate. And now Kit Green, who used to be the CIA director in charge of this area, has said, well, that was a big problem with remote viewing, is it's not 100% accurate. I actually disagree with that statement, because when you talk about human intelligence, you talk about the idea of using imperfect assets. Like, I know, Kyle, that maybe 80% of the time you may be wrong in your remote viewing, but that I know statistically that 20% you're always right. And then I also, by the way, at the same time have all of the assets of the US government, every satellite, everything else, so that I can, in that one instance, because I have so much power at my disposal, I can go check that terrorist's cell phone. I can look at the satellite map of the Carl's Jr. where he's having his burger. I can do all of these other things that I wouldn't have known to look there unless you gave me that highly unreliable intelligence, because it doesn't cost me much to look, but I never would have looked had you not given me the idea to look there. And that's what happens again and again in remote viewing, is that there's enough evidence that statistically it's impossible that it was just by chance. But at the same time, you can use the unknown nature of consciousness, basically, to debunk it, because you can say, well, we don't know how consciousness works, so therefore remote viewing does not work. That's not a rational statement, because just because you don't understand something, that's the whole point of science, right? We don't get it, so we need our best scientific minds to be aware of it and try to figure it out. But at the same time, there's no funding for something like this because it's not taken seriously.
Like the double slit experiment, where it appears that it is the observer who's affecting the outcome of something, then you making those comparisons to remote viewing seem to make sense then. That it's, because it's the ultimate observer who affects it, whether it's a particle or a wave depends on who's looking at it, and what you're doing. It's the observer who's affecting it, not the waves or the particles themselves, but ultimately you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's it. That's it. You just hit on the secret of the universe right there. That is the most profound thing that you can possibly hit on. It is, you know, it's the thing that every great religion, every master, and in fact, every quantum physicist, you know, has discovered, which is that you depend on whether or not X, Y, or Z is going to happen. You know, the act of your consciousness existing somehow, and this isn't something that I'm not pulling this from the remote viewing movie. I'm just extrapolating this from my own experience and just like whatever. But it really does seem like, you know, the only way you could remote view something on Jupiter, because you know, 6 months before the first probe even gets there to see what's going to be there, is that it's already there in your consciousness. It exists. You have access to all of that, and that's what the ancients said. Like if you look at stuff like the Book of Life in the Hebrew religion, or the Akashic Record in the Hindu religion, you know, they all talk about how you can basically, using your mind, open this up and then use it to access information you otherwise would not have. And if that's the case, then you're fundamentally connected to it, and then you fundamentally have a direct experience of it, and a possible influence of it. So like if Kyle gets this brilliant idea about how to create you know, a device that'll feed millions of people, and you're working on that in isolation, maybe you're picking that up from some other consciousness that exists on the world or even someplace else, and maybe you're also broadcasting that signal out that other consciousness can pick up on, which is why you get like 2 or 3 people inventing the radio within weeks, or the airplane on 2 different continents, or stuff like the 100th monkey effect, which says that if you teach 100 monkeys on an island how to you know, use a certain tool, this is Rupert Sheldrake's work, you know, he then eventually every monkey in the entire species, no matter where they are, has figured it out. You know,
it's, what he's saying is and I'd seen this before, where they one monkey learned to wash bananas in the water, and somehow other monkeys completely separated on other islands figured out the same thing at the same time. They had both figured this out, like even though there was no connection, but there still apparently is a fundamental connection that connects, you know, that connected them, or connects to people or ideas.
Yeah, and if you're going to buy into all of the research that's been done, and that there's validity to that, then our scientific model as it exists is wrong, period. You know, it's just wrong. Like, we are ignoring a really fundamental thing, which is consciousness. You know, it's like we and science, it can't latch on to consciousness because you can't define it, you can't put your finger on it, you can't measure it. It's not a material thing. But then again, if you go look at the experiences of UFO abductees, you know, if you go look at the experiences of people who will see lights in the sky and say something like, I think it was like communicating with me, and I could get like emotional feelings and things out of this. You know, you hear stories like that all the time. It's just anecdotal, but you hear it, and it suggests that all of this stuff that we're using ESP for right now, maybe in government, maybe not, you know, like when we know that like our aunt's going to call us from Iowa and you know, let us know that mom or dad is sick, or something, like when we have those kind of intuitive flashes, maybe that's just part of our own evolution as human beings, and maybe it's really common, you know, all throughout the universe, and we're just like the last to get on board.
Having my own personal experience with UFOs, and actually having one affect my my emotions, and seeming to be able to change them from interesting emotions that didn't make sense at the time, it really seems like there's a connection between even, you know, Homo sapiens and possibly extraterrestrials or whatever UFOs.
You know, Joe McGonigal gave a speech to MUFON a few years ago. You can find it on YouTube, and he talked about being tasked to look at the propulsion devices in UFOs and things like that, and how they operate. And he also postulated that at certain times of the day that maybe psychic abilities were more prevalent because we were actually facing the outer edge of the galaxy, where he postulates that maybe there's a denser level of consciousness that actually exists, like other societies, other cultures. They're living in other areas of the galaxy. It's possible. I mean, I think we'd be totally naive to think that, like, you know, that we're something like the only thing going, you know, and
That's more than naive. That's fucking ignorant. That's
right.
so like flat-headed. Just, you know, you're not even trying. You know, like
Right. I mean, you know, Galileo, I've said this before, that, you know, Galileo, when he developed his telescope, he brought it out into the streets of, like, you know, Verona or wherever he was, and he'd try to get people to look through it. And people would run away scared. They would not want to look through it because they didn't want to upset their worldview. They thought it was demonic. They thought it was like something else, you know. And I think that when something new develops, it scares people, you know, because they're not able to fit it within their existing paradigm, and you can't take away that paradigm from people without giving them something new. And right now,
is that why, like, people like you who will come out and try to give it a legitimacy that it didn't have before, hoping that in the future this will change? Like, does it bother you that, you know, science doesn't want to take it seriously? They just want to ignore it, and you know, religious people would be you know, all about it, you know, like the more esoteric side. I mean,
you'd think so. You'd think so. And you know, the Bible says, you know, we're created in God's image, right? And I mean, I'm not overly religious or anything, but I mean, it says it right there. Like, you know, hey, you know, you are a part of this whole thing. You're not this little minuscule thing that doesn't matter. You're actually a real part of it, you know?
Yeah.
But yet, a lot of people look at stuff like this and they go, oh, you know, this is just like the devil, man. I'm not going to even deal with this because it's satanic or whatever. They've dealt with that in the movie, in government. You know, so many of the high ranking people that oversaw the program were like, oh, no, this is like your work, and you're doing the devil's work, and we don't want anything to do with that, because that's just the cultural bias that these people were coming from. And, you know, okay, but what does it really, at the end of the day, say about who we are as human beings? You're right. Like, a religious person should get this and go, you know, yeah, it means we're all connected. That's great. You know, like the Buddhists probably like it because that's already part of their religion. You know, the Hindus too. But where
would you like to see it come into science, like where scientists were like, actually, there happens to be neurotransmitters. There's actually receptors in your brain that actually receive information, like your ear canal or your eyes would, you know, transmit or compute light waves. There's also this that, you know, would you like to see there a biological study as opposed to just a theoretical study?
They've done many. You know, the Soviet Union did that for decades. You know, like the Soviet Union is communist, so they're all about the material world. Everything must have a material explanation in the Soviet philosophy. And they dismissed some of their most successful scientists working in the ESP field because eventually, after years, they'd say, we've tried all these experiments and we can't find any way to dampen the signal. We can't find any way to stop this because it's not coming from anything material. It's all pervasive. You know, it's like the fucking Force or something. I mean, it's like, you know, 1,000 million voices crying out in agony when the planet dies. I mean, that's like Obi-Wan says in Star Wars. You know, it's like, this is not something that is your ear canal or even your pineal gland or whenever you want to talk about it, because it's not that sort of signal. You know, it's completely non-local. And in fact, you know, you could even say that the work that was done in remote viewing says something about the survival of consciousness after death as well. You know, and you know, I came into this very like sort of open and also closed in some ways, and I leave it more sort of open than I was, because if your consciousness can look far into the future or into the past or see things that are going to happen, well, we know that energy can't be destroyed, right? You know, so that means that part of you is like living in this kind of like internet cloud, like as if you're a file on the net, and is not directly connected here. You know, it's just you're pulling down that information, and so if that's the case, then that means that something of your uniqueness outlives you because it's already out there, and so what does that all end in? I don't know, but I know that if we as a species are not looking at this stuff seriously and not taking it seriously, I don't think we're going to survive like a lot longer, and I think that again, just my own opinion, but if like an extraterrestrial race was interested in us on this planet right now, and if they understood all of this stuff that we're talking about in terms of the fact that stuff like ESP is real, then they'd be really concerned because we're not getting it. And we're like this at each other. And that might even affect them because they feel it just like we do not, like they're getting all this crap from us, like bad radio or something,
Yeah. That's a very interesting way of putting it. I mean, and that, it seems to make a lot of sense. I know you're probably getting short on time, so before we go, I've
got time. Don't worry. I've got another like 20 minutes. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Can we, anyone who wants to ask any questions to Lance, if Lance, you want
to? Yes, please.
I can see your comments on YouTube, so please feel free to ask any question you want to Lance right now. I'm not going to go back through any previous questions, so rewrite it if you'd asked one previously. I was paying attention to Lance, so I couldn't really read your comments. Normally, Lance, I watch everyone's comments and I'll react to them instantly, but
it's no problem, man. I mean, I think that the coolest thing about doing this film for me has been that I was working for so long in isolation, and you feel like you have this like little gem that you're working on. Nobody else knows about it, and I would literally have conversations with people about it, and they wouldn't get it, and it's like, well, just watch the movie, then maybe you'll get it, and it's so relieving to actually be able to talk about this stuff, now that the movie's out. And I mean, we're number 5. I think we're still number 5 on iTunes. That means that a lot of people are being exposed to this that have never heard anything about this stuff, and that's awesome to me because I feel like the psychic spy stuff to me is like a Trojan horse. It's a way of like looking into this and seeing sort of the legitimacy of the stuff that was done. But then it just opens up a bunch of questions like, okay, well, but if that happened, then what else is real? What is reality?
That is true. We do. And it's funny because we have a question here coming from our friend TM Cleanfield. Ask Lance, can remote viewing be dangerous for the remote viewer?
Excellent question. Not necessarily dangerous in like an immediate physical sense, but like for instance, Ingo Swann, who was really the father of remote viewing, and he coined the phrase at SRI in the modern era. He was once tasked to look inside a volcano, and it was just like a demonstration of ability test. And he didn't know it was a volcano, obviously. And he went inside psychically and he was looking around at this, and then the volcano goes off. And he said it was like a horrible experience. It's like he felt this like searing pain, and he demanded that Hal Puthoff and Russell not give him targets like that again in the future. So you can experience, I think, it's not just a visual sense. They've found that people use all of their senses when remote viewing, or at least can be trained to do that. For instance, in our film, we have there's an extra on iTunes, and some of it's in the end credits of the film, called Music from the Fringe. And it was a group of cellists, young college students, that were given remote viewings to score our film. So they would hear musical impressions. They would get musical impressions based upon what the targets were. And they did this twice, one without me and one where I participated with the people who were putting this on. And I said, I really want, I want this scene to feel like a battle. Give them like a picture of like Napoleon on the battlefield or something, and then see what they come back with, and then they would come back with this like warlike kind of a thing, and so it's something that where you can use all of your senses, and some people are better at some things than others. Maybe an engineer looks at everything like with schematics. Maybe a painter is using their visual field. A musician is using music. But the it's not dangerous from the point of view that I think you're literally going to die from it. I think the danger is much more subtle than that. And it's an important thing to bring up it's just like anything else in life. You need balance. You need mental stability. You need not to overdo it. You need to not get caught up in it. Patanjali 2000 years ago in the Yoga Sutras said, yeah, you may see all of this stuff happening. You may be able to visit distant places and times. You may be able to see hidden objects, but don't get too caught up in it, because these are just signposts pointing to who you really are. They're not literal stopping places where that becomes and defines your life. When we talk about what the best remote viewers are, they're people who are really good at other things and who are very grounded and balanced. And you need that set and setting, that discipline in your life if you're going to get into remote viewing, because if you don't, the danger is that your imaginal world and your reality in the physical world gets blurry, and you could become unbalanced because you're not, because you lose your sense of discernment, and you can never lose your sense of discernment and your sense of being grounded, and I think that's the biggest danger.
Thank you for answering that. So TM Queenfield, Tom, don't try too hard, your fucking brain will explode. Okay. Third Phase wants to know, do you think the CIA is still working with the remote viewing program?
No comment, man. I gotta go. Wait. No, just kidding. I don't have proof of that. I will say that everybody in the film was very open, and even the CIA guys, felt like they had really been sort of haunted by this stuff for years and had been unable to talk about it. And CIA themselves actually released a lot of the questions that we had for the film to allow them to talk about this stuff. So, but again, it goes back to this idea of stovepiping, the fact that you have these vertical kind of monopolies on information, and maybe even the CIA today literally does not know about stuff that's going on in other areas. And my suspicion is, based on, the stuff that I did, emails disappearing from my inbox, that kind of stuff, that they're probably still doing it. And there's people in the film who said the same thing, including the former director of life sciences for CIA, who's in our film. They're probably still doing it, but they're not doing it under a big name agency like CIA. It's happening in some other really dark corner of government. And most likely that corner is done with contractors, like the way that SRI originally was done. These are it's like the Blackwaterization of psychic skills in the government, because now it's not like when SRI was the only game in town. Like, they're the only ones studying this stuff on a real scientific level. Now there's firms all over the place that can, you can hire and do remote viewings. Corporations are using them, police departments, Lori Williams, who's in my movie, and is one of the best remote viewing instructors, I believe, in terms of just being really open and affable and a wonderful human being. She does a lot of work for businesses, and they'll do stuff like product development. They'll say, what's the next big thing coming onto digital media in the next 10 years? And then they'll look ahead. Joe McMoneagle, who's the Army remote viewer, said that about 10 years before ebooks hit, he told a major book publisher, stop publishing on paper, start looking into software-based digital books, because it's going to replace paper. And
are you telling me people are remote stealing ideas? Are you saying people are looking in and stealing your fucking inventions?
That's right. They're pulling the inventions back in time. That's what they're doing. I swear to you, that's it. Now I don't know how successful a lot of that is. I've only heard a few anecdotal stories, but I can tell you that there's enough legit people that take that seriously, that there's an industry for it. And not just stealing ideas, but just in general using the tools. And all remote viewing system is kind of like an archival system for your intuitive abilities. It just gives you a way of kind of categorizing and understanding the data, and easily accessing it. But it's the same stuff that's always been done. But now it could very well be that I'm working for CIA, let's say, and you're a remote viewer, And I've been kind of following your work and looking at the reviews and maybe talking to some other people who have used you for something. So I think you're pretty legit. So I just send you something and I say, there's someone, could you please remote view, Catalina Island and the activity that's happening there off of the coast about 2 miles, and then whatever that person sends back has no idea if it's classified, has no idea if this is CIA doing it or if it's anybody else. They're just doing it. And so I think it's much more likely to be happening that way, because then there's no oversight. There's no danger of being outed and then becoming like the laughingstock of the intelligence community, which was a real big concern within CIA after MK Ultra and a lot of the other kind of mishaps that had happened in CIA. So
once they make a program, a private program that's not officially ran by the government, freedom of information requests no longer apply.
That's right.
Correct.
That's right.
So
that's why. Mm-hmm.
Basically,
you don't have to report to anybody. Like, I don't have to go to Senator so and so and get permission or whatever. Like the ATIP program with the UFO stuff. That had real congressional oversight and they'd given them a lot of money. But that's just now. Like, what were they doing before that? Like, were they using Bigelow in other ways where it was just contractor stuff where he wasn't having to report to government? It's the same thing with the remote viewing program stuff. It's like it could literally be anywhere, because it's not hard to do an operational program. Because an operational program, you're not care about like where the data comes from. You just care if it's useful or not. And so.
Well, do you think it makes sense? I mean, like, do you think like the government would spend $20+ million, 20+ years trying to prove Santa Claus is real?
Okay, let's be totally fair about this.
How long do you think it would take for them to prove that he doesn't exist?
Let's be totally above board about this, because the answer to that is yes. If everybody else thought that Santa was real. If China and Russia both said Santa Claus is real, we've been tracking him over the North Pole. We believe he's got nukes in his sleigh and he's going to kill 1 million kids. Let's say that if that information came out, then the U.S. government would track that and they would take it seriously. So in that respect, yes, I do believe that the government will follow all kinds of paths if they see a real reality to it. And I think on the opposite end, they would go overtime to convince you that Santa wasn't real. If they absolutely knew that Santa was real, and was somehow useful to them and was delivering their nuke or whatever, then they would work very hard to convince you that it does not exist. So and it would be easy to do because it's so freaking ridiculous that there's a guy in a red suit or whatever. Oh, I'm sorry if there's any children watching this. Maybe he is real, but it's not that simple, because our own
going to see this and be fucking pissed at you, dude.
Right.
Like, what?
Yeah. but the bottom line is that it's an imaginary tool. The engine of remote viewing is your imagination, and your imagination can come up with all kinds of shit. So it makes it easy to debunk.
Well, it seems like there's enough evidence to support something that they will. But if there's not enough evidence to support it, I don't think they would waste any time researching something that they were like, oh, this is definitely fake. Like, we know Santa Claus doesn't exist, or kids, maybe he does. I don't know. I doubt they would ever go and say, let's go look for fucking Gargamel. Let's go look for some Smurfs. And spend some money and time. Now, if there was actually some evidence supporting it, then they would say, okay. And I think with remote viewing, that there was enough supporting evidence for them to continue and be willing to put 20 years worth of investigation and $20 million worth.
But again, remember, $20 million is like the barest scrapping of the surface here, because it does not take into account any assets that were applied to this by the government. It doesn't apply to the 100 satellite analysts like scoring over data to find if a remote viewer was right or not. Has absolutely no bearing on the cost of the Army program at Fort Meade, which was probably in the hundreds of millions. That is a actual misinformation tool I think that has been used where you say, they'd spend $20 million blowing their nose. It's like no big deal. Number one, that's not true, because the Army program and SRI would not have continued to have contracts year over year over year had they not been highly successful, because the government doesn't do that. And
you can only fund a job for so long. If it's not giving you results, then
right. They and they had reporting and oversight to the highest levels. And again, that's why I go back to, I don't think that reporting exists today, because it's so easy to do. They've already proven that it works. So they don't necessarily need to spend that money on research. They're just doing operational work, and they have their own guys.
They're like, hey, fucking Stanford, find us some psychics, shut the fuck up.
Right.
Get us Pat Price, get us this mystery bitch that no one knows about. All right. And bring them over here. I mean, like an agency like the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, wouldn't it seem more likely like these guys would employ full-time remote viewers?
No, what it would do is they would be working with CIA or NSA or some other agency that has connections to remote viewers. And then those people within CIA would go to the NRO and they would ask, what do you guys want to know about? And then they would say, send us whatever your tasking is. They would send that to the intermediary, and the intermediary would say, okay, so we really want to know what's going on in the desert in Libya at these coordinates. And then CIA would farm that out to maybe different groups of remote viewers. And then they would all look at it, and then they would come back with the data. CIA would then give the data back to NRO, and maybe there would be highly accurate things, but NRO would not ever know where that data came from. It could have come from like a guy on a camel in Libya, or it could have come from like, wherever. It's like they don't need to say, oh, this is what my personal psychic came up with yesterday. Please look at it and tell us what you think. It's like, no, they would just say, we got some HUMINT intel on something happening in Libya. Is there any verification to this? And then that circulates through government, and then it's clean. Nobody knows about it because it's happening outside.
I mean, like, who's the guy, Pat Price? Now, he was officially working for the CIA. They're just paying him whatever, and he's getting a paycheck. Like, do you think like they're making it so now that's a private corporation just to deflect from, or being responsible for
again, I'm speculating. I mean, for all I know, there's a warehouse with 100 remote viewers underneath the basement of the Pentagon, and they're all sitting there working. I don't know, but I will say that back when Pat was taken directly into to CIA, the reason was because nobody else was doing this, and because they didn't understand it, they didn't fully believe it. They wanted to debunk it. That was their primary goal. They wanted to get this off of their radar.
Psychics working under the Pentagon right now. Tell me the fucking truth, Lance.
Maybe
you got secret info. I know you got hours of footage and secret info. You got come up with shit.
You'll have to wait and see, man. You gotta buy the movie. Live now, worldwide, digital outlets.
Where you can get it. Amazon, Google Play, YouTube, every digital media, you can go and pick it up. And the name of your YouTube channel is
my YouTube channel is Lance Mungia, or youtube.com Waking Universe TV. Waking Universe TV is the URL for it. And you can go on there. I'm putting up tons and tons of extras. I will continue to do that for a long time because I have so much extra stuff. I'm going to start blogging there more and trying to build that channel. So I would appreciate it if you subscribe there. ThirdEyeSpies.com is the only place you can go if you actually want a physical disc. If you want a Blu-ray or a DVD, we're selling them there. We're also if you go to ThirdEyeSpies.com, you can get on a list, and we're going to occasionally send out stuff from Russell Targ's archive of remote viewing materials and updates as to what's going on with the film. This is all word of mouth right now. Like right now, we don't have a large marketing budget. The word of mouth alone is like kicking ass. We are literally number 5 right now on the top 5 documentaries on iTunes, strictly through mainly word of mouth videos like this. Just this is something. Yeah, we got to get it to number 1. I say, Solo's going into Carbonite. We're going to get rid of Free Solo, the Oscar winner. They're going down. Great movie. I love the movie, but we're going to take over, man. I mean, we have to, because this is information that never would have come to light. It sort of would have been in this kind of like archive somewhere, and thank goodness people are liking the movie and they're sharing it, and that this is growing, because the information is important because it talks about who we are as human beings, and that's crucial. I have time for like one more question if there's somebody else.
Yeah, let's see who. Let's find a good question. You guys got one more question before Lance has to get out of here. So let's see. Who wants? Anyone? Feel free to ask a question. I'm sorry, I'm going back through other previous comments and everything. Let's see here. Where's a question? I see a lot of you guys. I don't even know what the fuck these guys are talking about.
Can he remote view that I'm in my bathrobe right now?
So while we're waiting, because it'll take a second for them to ask Lance if he watches UFC. I don't know what that has to do with remote viewing.
That's probably my friend Clyde or something, who's like a huge UFC fan. I actually did a documentary once, just a little mini documentary on UFC. I actually am a fan of UFC, not like huge, not like I'm like my daily thing or something, but in the Crow movie I did, Tito Ortiz was in that movie. And
I'm a huge fan of MMA, and so
no, I mean MMA is the best, man. I mean, it takes like the best of everything and just like wraps it around, Yeah,
I love that. Well, you asshole! But you couldn't ask him a goddamn question about the movie.
Just for that, he has to go out and buy the movie now.
Right? No, but for real, you guys, I want to thank everybody for coming and joining us. And I really want to thank Lance. And Lance, for real, we have to do this again.
Yeah, we do, man. Let's make this like a thing, man. You can come on my channel, I'll come on your channel. Let's just keep it going. It's like I should also mention there is a possibility that my next project will involve UFO stuff. I'm actually thinking about combining the whole remote viewing thing with UFOs and sort of the consciousness aspects. And, that's fascinating to me. And so that could be a project coming soon. It'll probably be like one aspect of this like wider project I'm going to do about consciousness. And that will be really cool, because I think that the people who are interested in the topics that you tend to address here on UFO Proof are the same people that are going to really enjoy stuff that talks about, issues of consciousness and the remote viewing stuff and all that, because it's related. It's the same. It's two sides of the same coin, and people we tend to like compartmentalize, but the evidence really suggests that, we're going about UFO contact all wrong. Like, we're trying to like find radio signals and shit, and like waiting for like signal flags and like the guy to land on the lawn. ET may be talking to you in your dreams, or maybe just giving you the inspiration for a great idea, like a documentary. It's just
maybe UFOs actually communicate through flashing lights. I mean, like
signal flares.
Talking to you right now, you literally have no idea. It's like there's just so many levels to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on like, I don't know if you ever gone on like UFO summoning. Have you ever done that? Do you know anything about it?
Oh yeah. I mean, like like the CE5, like
right.
Yeah.
And there's probably something to that like, if you're a super advanced race of beings, and that understands what we're just trying to figure out right now about how our sort of mind works and our subconscious and our ability to kind of create with the mind. If we're just now figuring that out and they have it figured out, and all of a sudden you like raise up a signal with consciousness saying, hey, I'd really like to talk, it's probably instantaneous, because remote viewing and sort of ESP are faster than light abilities. I mean, time and space don't really apply. In fact, it's much harder to look at something in this particular moment than it is to see stuff kind of like spread out in space and time. So
it seems interesting that people don't really see the similarities between if someone was trying to communicate telepathically or someone who's praying.
That's right. That's right. So, that's right. Yeah. You're so right. I mean, it's like if I say a prayer and
You're
you know,
reaching
this,
out with your mind.
yeah, you're reaching out, you know, and then you bring stuff back to you, and it's proven. I mean, you know, Russell Targ's daughter did all of these experiments in the 90s about remote healing, distance healing using prayer. You know, and it didn't matter what kind of prayer. It didn't matter if it was like a Native American shaman or a Wiccan or a Catholic priest or whatever. If you get a group of people together and you pray, you know, the evidence that she found was that people get better, you know, and so there's something there, you know, and in fact, it's one last quick story. One of the extras that are on my YouTube channel, Waking Universe TV, Lance Mungia, one of those extras is about Russell's relationship with his daughter and the fact that they took this trip to Russia together, and they wound up seeing Brezhnev's office, which Russell had once remote viewed, and he got all these details correct, and he was able to confirm it. And then they did a remote viewing to San Francisco, and they got that right. And Elizabeth Targ was like the translator. It was his daughter who did all this healing work, you know, as a very serious doctor at UCLA Medical Center. Actually, she was a psychologist and all this, but she wound up passing away because of the same very, 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 very rare cancer that she had been studying at the time in some of her experiments. There was like 12 people on the planet or something that had this form of cancer. She contracted it, you know, and yeah, and she passed away, unfortunately, because it's too bad, because it was in the prime of her life and she was such a great researcher, you know, and I'm glad that we were able to sort of honor her in that extra. You know, it didn't fit within the larger context of the film, but we put together a really nice piece, which you can see on YouTube, that it's called To Russia with Love. And it's about Russell's daughter and him.
Oh man, that sounds awesome. Everyone go and check out his YouTube channel. I can't wait to check out those.
Yeah.
It'll be the first thing I do is go and check out this.
To Russia with Love is actually, I think it should be live there today. It might be live on there tomorrow, because I'm releasing like one a day. So, okay. So if it's not there, it'll be there tomorrow for sure.
Plug your channel again. Plug the movie again.
Lance Mungia, or that's MUNGIA, or YouTube.com Waking Universe TV is the name of the YouTube channel. The movie, easiest way to find out everything about the movie is just go to thirdeye-spies.com. You can get it on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, Xbox, you know, Carrier Pigeon. I don't know, whatever. You can find the movie. Maybe you could put that in your description. You know, that you can just get the movie at thirdeye-spies.com. And there's a ton of different ways to see it now. And please, if you enjoy the film, write a review wherever you buy it. Share it on social media. That's like totally the way that people are finding this film. So we need the help.
So you guys heard him, and I'm telling you, it'll totally be worth it. Go and get the movie, share it, give it a good review. I mean, I don't have to tell you to give it a good review. Once you see it, you'll give it a good review yourself, because it is that good. You guys know I'm not going to just sit there and talk shit. I was impressed, and hey, man, you gotta see it, dude. I'm telling you, it's totally worth it, you guys. Lance, again, thank you so much for doing this interview, and I can't wait to do it again with you. All right, buddy?
Oh man, thank you. I'm using my mind powers right now. Watch the movie. Watch the movie. No, thank you to everybody who watched, and Kyle, man, you're awesome, dude. We got to do this again. You know, we'll do it. We'll do it when I put up the Uri Geller sequence that I'm doing for the YouTube channel. Maybe we can talk about it.
Absolutely, that's 100%. All right, all right, you guys. Thank you so much, Lance. All right,
man. Take care,
everybody. We'll see you next time. UFO Proof out. All right, later.